Thank you very much for being here. My name is Alexey Makarin. I'm an assistant professor in our Institute for Economics and Finance in Rome. And this paper is together with Vasily Korovkin, who is at CEPR. And the title is Production Networks in War. So armed conflict is a widespread phenomenon. Every year, it kills more than 50,000 people in more than 50 countries around the world. And the number of conflicts, if anything, has only gone up in the past 2 decades. So one of the central questions in development economics and political economy is what are the economic consequences of these events? What are the economic consequences of conflict? And there's a very big literature devoted to answering this question. One drawback of this literature is that it puts too much emphasis on studying the direct exposure of individuals and firms to violence, and the spillovers of conflict are understood much less. And why should we care about this? So first, at least more than 2.6 billion people live at least as of 2016, more than 2.6 billion of people live in countries with ongoing conflicts, but at least 50 kilometers away from the violent events. And second, if the spillovers of conflict are non-zero, then the traditional estimates within country estimates that compare violent and non-violent areas may heavily underestimate the total economic cost of conflict. So, of course, also another dimension which the literature is lacking is there is almost no evidence of the spillovers of conflict on firms. And there could be many things that could be going on, how conflict may affect the rest of the country. There could be that conflict creates severe demand shocks that may propagate and decrease demands for other inputs in the rest of the country. Also, you may think of supply chain shocks that may be caused by violence and destruction of infrastructure. So this type of spillovers may be especially crucial for middle-income countries and industrialized contexts, but they may not be limited necessarily to those. So in this paper, we study one of the largest conflicts of the past decade, which is the 2014 Russia-Ukraine conflict. And we study the spillovers of that on the rest of Ukraine. So we argue that the setting is close to ideal to study spillovers of conflict. First, because violence was relatively localized to Donbas area. And second, Donbas and Crimea were together responsible for 17.5% of the Ukraine's GDP. So the shock is huge. And studying that is I think it's very interesting. And so here's just the map of Ukraine, and then I'll switch back to the previous slide. So this is the map of Ukraine. As you may know, in February 2014, Russia conducted a covert military intervention to annex Crimea, which is at the bottom of the map. And later in April 2014, Russia started promoting secessionist movements in the east of Ukraine, in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions, which are together called Donbas. And the green areas are the ones that parts of those regions that remained de facto part of Ukraine, and the gray area is where the conflict was taking place. So the annexation of Crimea went relatively peacefully, but the conflict in the east of Ukraine turned very violent. It is now officially classified as a war, and it is now responsible for more than 30,000 casualties. And another key takeaway from this map is that, as you can see, most of the territory of Ukraine was not directly exposed to violence. So this presents a very nice setup for studying these spillovers of conflict on the rest of the country. So what we do is that we use data on firm-to-firm railway shipments from 2014 to 2016, so before and after the start of conflict, that allows us to track the evolution of the production network before and after this large shock. This makes this data pretty unique, not only in the conflict literature, but maybe in economics more generally. And also, we are not too worried that this is a subset of all trade transactions, because railroads are actually the main way of transporting products within Ukraine. So let me tell you what exactly do we do in the end. So first, we document and quantify the propagation effects of conflict. And by the propagation effects here, we mean that the war affects not only firms in close proximity, but also their trade with buyers and suppliers, the trade of those buyers and suppliers with their own buyers and suppliers, and so forth. We document this in the difference and differences framework, comparing trade intensity before and after the conflict began, between trade links that are connected to the conflict areas and those that are not. And we allow the effects to vary for links that are directly connected to the conflict areas and those that are indirectly connected to the conflict areas. So what we find is that the first degree effects of conflict on trade are, of course, huge. So by the first degree, we mean that the effect on trade links in which one of the firms is directly located in the conflict area. So as you can see, the trade declines by about 73% relative to the pre-war mean. The second degree effects are also negative and significant. and they're about 1/4 of the first degree effects. The second degree means that if we take two firms, both of them are located outside the conflict area, but one of them had traded with someone in the conflict area before the start of the conflict. So the second degree effects is what we call, in a sense, propagation. And these second degree effects are very important because a naive difference specification that does not estimate the second degree effects would underestimate the total economic cost of conflict on trade by about 67%. And that's because there are many more of the second degree connections than the first degree connections to the conflict. Second, we argue that the conflict shock does not only propagate through the production network, but also if the shock is large enough and if it's persistent enough, it may also change the network structure itself, and this may have implications for individual firm performance. So in the case of Ukraine, two large regions were practically cut off from trade with the rest of the country. So we think that, if this effect exists anywhere, it should exist here. And in fact, we do observe it. So we find that the one standard deviation increase for this exogenous reason due to the conflict shock, increase in firm centrality, leads to about 9 to 15% smaller decline in sales. And also we find similar effects for profits as well. And finally, we use a production networks model to study how changes in the network structure affect firm revenue distribution in the rest of the country. So the first way in which the conflict changes the network structure is what we call network destruction. And by that, we mean that conflict removes certain firms from the economy due to violence and so forth. And second, the second channel is what we call network adjustment. And that means that after the destruction shock, firms are now able to find new suppliers and find new buyers and reconnect and adjust their network. And we have a production networks model that allows us to distinguish these effects in a set of counterfactual exercises. We find that the network destruction reduces the median firm revenue by about 47% in the rest of the country. And importantly, network adjustment compensates for about 80% of that decline. So we're able to quantify the role of network adjustment in reaction, in recovery after this huge economic shock. So that's the paper. And yeah, I'm looking forward to any questions if you have any, or I can kind of expand on any of the things that you find interesting. Clement.
Alexey, yeah, great paper. It's really interesting.
Thank you.
I'll make sure I read the full paper. I was wondering, do you have anything or any ideas on like population displacement and changes in the labor market? Because you'd imagine that some people moved from the Donbass region to elsewhere, and then trade might decrease, but then the cost structure changes, and it's not necessarily all a bad thing for the other side of the country.
Yeah, so labor displacement, I mean, that is a very big part of what is going on here. So in Donbass region, in Crimea, everybody stayed pretty much, but in Donbass, about 2 million of people they had to move. Part of that number, maybe 1 million went to Russia, and maybe the rest went to the rest of Ukraine. So unfortunately, the data on where they exactly moved is not great. So it's only available at these province levels, and we were not able to locate more detailed data on like which specific cities the people went. So in a sense, we are constrained on what we can do. So we are not doing anything on that. In principle, if we had some data, we could potentially do something. One thing that we had in mind, why maybe, if anything, this labor displacement may actually work in the opposite direction, at least in the propagation part of our paper, is that probably people went to the places that are more economically connected to the conflict areas. And so if anything, those firms experience a positive boost those areas experience a positive labor supply shock, and those firms should be doing better.
Right. Thanks. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I had a question about the difference in magnitudes. Hi, Alexey.
Yeah.
This is difference at the firm level or at the region level?
So the first part is at the trade link level. So a firm sends something to another firm,
Yeah.
and we document the trade intensity of that link.
No,
So,
I was just thinking this, the 67%, the naive difference in difference, I guess. Well, how is the naive difference in difference set up is what I was kind of wondering.
yeah, the naive is just the same, but without second degree effects. So you have trade intensity on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, we have firm pair fixed effects, the year month fixed effects, and this post-conflict indicator interacted with when one of the two firms is located directly in the conflict area. So that's the first degree effect. And then in kind of a non-naive specification, we also add the second degree effect where neither of the two firms is directly located in the conflict area, but they had traded with someone in the conflict area before the start of conflict.
Yeah, okay, I see. Because what I was trying to figure out, is it an underestimation or is it like a contamination of the, is it really that the...
So there are two effects that go on. So yeah, so first, the second degree effect, the presence of them may contaminate the control group when you estimate.
Okay, that's my question, yeah.
Yeah, so that's actually, surprisingly, that's not, the contamination part is not really present in our setup for some reason. Whenever we add the second degree effects, actually the coefficient on the first degree effects do not really change.
Okay.
But this effect is coming just from the fact that the second degree coefficients are negative and significant at 1/4. So when we aggregate these coefficients up by the number of second degree connections, you're missing out a lot. So that's how we calculate this number.
Okay, thanks.
Hi, Alexey.
Oh, hi,
when you
Alex.
mentioned that network adjustment compensate for 80% of that decline, what kind of time horizon are you looking at? And what is the time horizon you use to estimate the initial diff, and whether you can sort of visually, or whether do you study the over time of that recovery?
So actually, 80% is just 2014 relative to 2015. So just after the start of conflict, just before. We also track that number also for 2015, 2016, because we know how the production network evolves, so we can plug in the actual production network matrices for those years after as well. And actually, surprisingly, this number does not really change that much. We were a bit surprised. I think what's going on is that at the median firm revenue, maybe adjustment happens quickly, but for other parts of the distribution, still like those other parts of the distribution of the revenue distribution is actually, for them, the effects are different. So for instance, the 75th percentile of the revenue distribution, for that actually you see the positive dynamics. So at the median, it seems like the adjustment happens quickly, perhaps surprisingly quickly, but that's basically how it is. Like we cannot, like we were surprised, but it is what it is. No, thanks. It was a good question. Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Alexey. We just have a 10-minute break now, and then we'll go on to the next session. So if you want to stretch your legs, drink some water, now's the time to do so. Thank you, Alexey.
No, thanks so much. And thank you to everyone for attending this session and for the questions. Thank you.